The first scream died in Zara Collins' throat as darkness swallowed her whole. One moment she had been standing in the warm May sunshine of 1875. The next she was plummeting down the abandoned well on the edge of her father's property in Malad City, Idaho Territory. Her beautiful blue dress billowed around her like a cloud as she fell, her petticoats offering no protection when she crashed into the frigid water below. "You'll regret refusing me, Zara." Theodore Harrington's voice echoed down from the circular opening far above, now merely a coin of light in the vast darkness. "No one rejects a Harrington. You'll change your mind down there, or you'll die alone." Panic seized her chest as the water, shockingly cold for late spring, soaked through her layers of clothing. She struggled to stay afloat, her sodden skirts threatening to drag her under. The slimy stone walls offered no handholds, only cold, mossy surfaces that slipped beneath her desperate fingers. "Help!" she screamed, her voice bouncing off the stone walls. "Someone help me!" Theodore's face appeared briefly at the opening, his handsome features distorted by rage. "No one can hear you out here. You should have accepted my proposal when you had the chance." His shadow disappeared, and Zara heard the distant sound of his horse's hooves as he rode away, tears mixed with the water dripping down her face. Theodore had seemed so charming at first, the son of the wealthiest merchant in Malad City, handsome and well-spoken. But she had seen the coldness in his eyes when he spoke to servants, the cruelty in how he treated those beneath his station. When he'd proposed marriage after merely 3 chaperoned meetings, she'd politely declined. His response had been anything but polite. She'd been walking along the edge of her father's property when he'd intercepted her. His proposal had quickly turned to threats, and when she'd tried to leave, he'd seized her by the waist and thrown her down the abandoned well her father had been meaning to fill in for years. The water was achingly cold. Zara struggled to keep her head above the surface, her arms growing weary as she tread water. Her thoughts turned to her father, away on business in Boise. He wasn't expected back for 3 days. Would anyone even notice she was missing before then? "Please," she whispered, though there was no one to hear her prayers. "Please don't let me die down here." Hours passed. The coin of light above dimmed as the sun began to set. Zara's limbs grew numb, her strength fading. The cold had seeped into her bones, and no matter how she tried, she couldn't stop her teeth from chattering. She had managed to wedge herself against a small outcropping of stone that allowed her to keep her head above water without exhausting herself completely. But she knew she couldn't last the night like this. Just as the last light was fading from the sky, she heard the soft crunch of boots on gravel, the quiet nickering of a horse. "Hello," she called, her voice raw and weak. "Is someone there? Please help me." For a terrifying moment, she thought she'd imagined it. Then a shadow blocked the fading light at the top of the well. "Hello down there," a deep voice called. "Are you all right, madam?" "No," Zara cried, relief flooding through her so strongly she nearly lost her grip on the stone. "I was pushed. I can't get out." "Hang on," the voice called. "I'm going to get you out of there." The shadow disappeared for a moment, and Zara felt panic rising again before she heard the sounds of movement. A lariat suddenly appeared, the loop dangling just above the water's surface. "Can you get a hold of that?" the voice called. With trembling hands, Zara reached for the rope. It took 3 attempts before her numb fingers closed around it. "I've got it," she called. "I'm going to pull you up slow and steady," the man said. "Try to use your feet against the wall to help if you can." The rope tightened, and Zara felt herself being lifted from the water. Her sodden dress weighed her down terribly, but the steady strength at the other end of the rope never faltered. Inch by painful inch, she was pulled upward. Her feet scrabbled against the mossy walls. finding occasional purchase that helped her ascent. After what seemed an eternity, she neared the top. A strong hand reached down and grasped her wrist, and with one powerful heave, she was pulled over the edge of the well and onto solid ground. Zara collapsed onto the grass, coughing and shaking uncontrollably. When she finally managed to look up, she found herself staring into the most concerned pair of blue eyes she'd ever seen. The man kneeling beside her wore the dust-covered clothes of a cowboy denim pants, a faded cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, and a weathered leather vest. His hat lay on the ground where he'd discarded it to pull her up. His face was tanned from the sun, with a strong jaw shadowed with a day's worth of beard. He couldn't have been more than 25 or 26. "Miss, are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentle despite its depth. "Sea cold," she managed to stammer through chattering teeth. "So sea cold." Without hesitation, the man shrugged out of his leather vest and wrapped it around her shoulders. "My name's Wade Keller," he said, rubbing her arms briskly to generate warmth. "I was passing by on my way to town when I thought I heard someone calling." "Zara Collins," she replied. "Thank God you heard me." Wade's expression darkened. "You said you were pushed. Who would do such a thing?" Before she could answer, a violent shiver racked her body. Wade's concern deepened. "We need to get you warm first. Questions can wait." He stood and helped her to her feet, but her legs immediately buckled. Without hesitation, he swept her into his arms. "My camp's not far. I've got a fire and dry clothes you can use." Too exhausted and cold to protest, Zara allowed herself to be carried to where a sturdy chestnut gelding waited patiently. Wade set her gently on the horse, then mounted behind her, keeping one strong arm around her waist to prevent her from falling. "Hang on, Miss Collins," he murmured close to her ear. "I've got you now. You're safe." As they rode through the gathering darkness toward the warm glow of a campfire in the distance, Zara leaned back against the solid strength of the man who had pulled her from the darkness. For the first time since her terrifying plunge, she believed she might actually survive. Wade's camp was simple but well organized, situated in a small clearing near a stream. A small fire burned cheerfully, and a canvas tent was pitched nearby. As soon as they arrived, Wade helped her down from the horse and guided her to sit on a blanket near the fire. "Here," he said, rummaging through his saddlebags. He pulled out a flannel shirt and a pair of trousers. "They'll be too big, but they're dry. There's a spot behind those trees where you can change. I won't look, I promise." Zara took the clothes with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll heat some coffee while you change," Wade said, turning away to give her privacy. Struggling behind the trees, Zara peeled off her sodden dress and undergarments. The men's clothing felt strange against her skin, but the blessed dryness outweighed any impropriety. She rolled the sleeves and pant legs, cinched the waist with a piece of rope Wade had provided, and returned to the fire, carrying her wet clothes. Wade had his back turned, respectfully waiting for her signal. "I'm decent," she called softly. He turned, and for a moment, an expression she couldn't quite interpret crossed his face. Then he smiled gently and motioned for her to sit close to the fire. "You can hang those to dry," he said, indicating her wet clothing. As she draped them over nearby branches, he handed her a tin cup of steaming coffee. "It's strong and sweet, good for shock." The warmth of the cup seeped into her hands, and when she sipped the hot liquid, it seemed to thaw her from the inside out. For a few minutes, they sat in silence, Zara soaking in the warmth of the fire and the coffee while Wade occasionally added more wood to the flames. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice stronger now. "You saved my life, Mr. Keller." "Wade, please," he replied, settling across from her. and anyone would have done the same. No, Zara said, shaking her head. Anyone wouldn't have. And even if they wanted to, not everyone could have pulled me up like that. A slight flush colored his cheeks. Years of roping cattle, he said dismissively. Now, if you're feeling up to it, can you tell me what happened? Who pushed you down that well? Zara stared into the dancing flames. Theodore Harrington, she said quietly. He asked me to marry him. When I refused, he became angry. I never thought he would. Her voice broke. Wade's expression hardened. Harrington, the merchant's son, she nodded. You know him. I know of him, Wade replied, his tone carefully neutral. His father owns half the businesses in town. He hesitated, then asked, Will you report this to the sheriff? Zara laughed bitterly. Sheriff Davis. He's in Theodore's father's pocket, and it would be my word against Theodore's. The Harringtons are the most powerful family in Malad City. That doesn't give them the right to attempt murder, Wade said firmly. No, it doesn't, but it gives them the power to get away with it. Zara sighed, suddenly exhausted. My father won't be back from boys for 3 days. I can't go home. It's the first place Theodore will look if he discovers I survived. Wade studied her for a long moment, then nodded decisively. You'll stay with me until your father returns. I was heading to Malad City for supplies, but that can wait. I've got a small ranch about 15 miles south of here. It's not much, but you'll be safe there. I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition, Wade interrupted gently. I can't in good conscience leave you unprotected when someone's tried to kill you. Besides, he added with a small smile, my sister left some of her clothes at the ranch last time she visited. They should fit you better than mine. Zara hesitated, weighing her options. Propriety dictated she shouldn't accompany a strange man to his home, but propriety hadn't saved her from being thrown down a well. And there was something about Wade Keller's steady gaze that made her trust him in a way she'd never trusted Theodore, despite all his polished manners. Thank you, she finally said. I accept your offer, Wade nodded, satisfied. We'll head out at first light. You should get some sleep. Take the tent. I'll sleep out here by the fire. I can't take your tent. Yes, you can, he said firmly. I sleep under the stars half the time anyway. Too exhausted to argue further, Zara retreated to the tent. Despite the strangeness of her situation and the terror of the day, she fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the crackling of the fire and the reassuring presence of her rescuer just outside. Dawn was just breaking when Wade gently called her name from outside the tent. Zara woke disoriented, momentarily confused by the canvas walls surrounding her and the unfamiliar clothing she wore. Then the memories flooded back: Theodore's rage, the terrifying fall, the cold water, and finally, Wade's strong hands pulling her to safety. Miss Collins, Zara, I've made breakfast if you're hungry. I'll be right out, she called, quickly braiding her still damp hair and tucking it up as best she could without pins. Her clothes from yesterday were still damp, so she remained in Wade's oversized shirt and trousers. Outside, Wade was crouched by the fire, turning strips of bacon in a cast-iron skillet. He glanced up as she emerged, and a small smile tugged at his lips. Sleep well, he asked. Better than I had any right to, she admitted, settling on a blanket near the fire. Thank you again for everything. He waved away her thanks and handed her a plate with bacon and a thick slice of bread. Eat up. We've got a fair ride ahead of us. As they ate, Zara studied her rescuer in the clear morning light. His dark hair had a slight wave to it, and his blue eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. His hands were strong and calloused, the hands of a man used to hard work. There was a quiet confidence about him, so different from Theodore's brash arrogance. Tell me about your ranch, she said, curious about the man who had saved her life. Wade took a sip of coffee before answering. It's not much to look at. 160 acres I claimed under the Homestead Act 4 years ago. Got about 40 head of cattle, a few horses. It's small, but it's mine. You work it alone, mostly. Hire help for branding and such." He hesitated, then added, "Been trying to build something worth having." "I think that's admirable," Zara said sincerely. "Creating something of your own through your own labor." A hint of surprise crossed Wade's features, quickly replaced by a pleased smile. "Most folks from town think I'm crazy for choosing the hard way. Could have worked for one of the big outfits, had regular pay." "But it wouldn't have been yours," Zara said, understanding. Wade nodded, studying her with newfound interest. "Exactly." After breakfast, they quickly broke camp. Zara's dress was still too damp to wear comfortably for a long ride, so she remained in Wade's clothes, despite the impropriety. Her high-buttoned boots, though water-stained, had dried enough to wear. Wade packed her damp dress carefully in his saddlebags. "Ready?" he asked, holding out his hand to help her mount. Zara took his hand, noticing the gentle strength in his grip as he boosted her onto his horse. "What's his name?" she asked, patting the gelding's neck. "Rusty," Wade replied, swinging up behind her. "On account of his color." As they rode, the sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the spring air. The landscape of southern Idaho Territory spread out around them, rolling hills giving way to sagebrush plains, with mountains rising in the distance. It was beautiful in a stark, untamed way. "How did you come to be passing by our property yesterday?" Zara asked after they'd ridden in comfortable silence for a while. "Taking a shortcut to town," Wade explained. "Your father's land borders public range I sometimes use. I always ask his permission first," he added quickly. "Jonathan Collins is a fair man." "Yes, he is," Zara agreed, thinking fondly of her father. After her mother's death from influenza 5 years ago, it had just been the two of them. Her father had thrown himself into his work as the local banker, but he'd always made time for her. "He'll be grateful to you for helping me." "Any decent man would have done the same," Wade said, a hint of steel entering his voice. "And any decent man would want to see Theodore Harrington answer for what he did." "My father will see to that," Zara said confidently. "He may not have the Harringtons' wealth, but he has respect in the community. And he's not afraid of George Harrington, Theodore's father." They rode through the morning and into the early afternoon, stopping once to rest the horse and eat a simple lunch of jerky and hardtack from Wade's provisions. As they neared Wade's property, the landscape changed subtly. A small creek wound through the hills, its banks lined with cottonwoods just coming into full leaf. "Almost there," Wade said, pointing to a ridge ahead. "Ranch is just over that rise." When they crested the ridge, Zara got her first view of Wade's homestead. A sturdy log cabin sat in a natural clearing, smoke curling from its stone chimney. A small barn and corral stood nearby, and beyond them stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed. It wasn't grand by any means, but everything was neat and well maintained. "It's lovely," Zara said honestly. Wade's arms tightened slightly around her waist. "It's home," he said simply, but she could hear the pride in his voice. As they approached, the cabin door opened and an older woman stepped out, shading her eyes against the sun. "That's Mrs. Abernathy," Wade explained. "Widow from the next property over. Comes by twice a week to help with cooking and cleaning. Insists on it, though I've told her I can manage." The woman's eyes widened as she took in the sight of Wade with a woman dressed in men's clothing riding in front of him. "Wade Keller, what in heaven's name," she began, planting her hands on her hips. "Mrs. Abernathy, this is Miss Zara Collins," Wade interrupted smoothly as he dismounted and reached up to help Zara down. "She's had a bit of trouble and needs a safe place to stay until her father returns to town." The older woman's expression immediately softened as Wade quickly explained the situation, omitting some of the more disturbing details but making it clear that Zara had been in danger. "You poor dear," Mrs. Abernathy said, taking Zara's hands in her work-worn ones. "You come right inside. I've just made a stew and there's fresh bread. You look like you could use a good meal." "Thank you," Zara said gratefully, feeling immediately at ease with the motherly woman. "I'll see to Rusty," Wade said, "and bring in your dress to finish drying." The inside of the cabin was as neat and well-ordered as the outside. A main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a solid table, several chairs, and a comfortable-looking armchair near the fireplace. Two doors led off the main room, one to what Zara presumed was Wade's bedroom, the other likely a storeroom or second small bedroom. "You sit right there," Mrs. Abernathy instructed, guiding Zara to a chair at the table. "I'll fetch you some stew." "I can help," Zara offered, not wanting to be a burden. "Nonsense. You've had a terrible ordeal. Rest now." The stew was delicious, rich with beef, potatoes, and carrots, and the bread still warm from the oven. Zara hadn't realized how hungry she was until she started eating. Wade joined them after seeing to his horse, washing up at the basin by the door before sitting down to his own meal. As they ate, Mrs. Abernathy kept up a steady stream of conversation, tactfully avoiding questions about Zara's ordeal. Instead, she spoke of local news, her grandchildren and boys, and the early spring flowers she'd spotted on her walk over. It was wonderfully normal, and Zara felt some of the tension easing from her shoulders. After the meal, Mrs. Abernathy announced, "I brought over some of my daughter's old things last month for the church charity box, but they haven't gone yet. There's a dress that might fit you, Miss Collins. Let me fetch it." She disappeared into the second room and returned with a simple calico dress in a pretty shade of green. "It's nothing fancy, but it should do until your own clothes are properly dried." "It's perfect," Zara said sincerely. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Abernathy showed her to Wade's room where she could change in privacy. The room, like the rest of the cabin, was neat and spare. A bed with a handmade quilt, a chest for clothing, a small table with a Bible and a kerosene lamp. The only personal touch was a small framed photograph on the wall, a family portrait showing a younger Wade with what must be his parents and a girl who resembled him, presumably his sister. The dress Mrs. Abernathy had provided fit reasonably well, though it was a bit loose in the waist and short at the ankles. Still, it was infinitely better than wearing men's clothing, and Zara felt more herself as she rejoined the others in the main room. Wade glanced up as she entered, and that same unreadable expression she'd noticed the night before crossed his face before he quickly looked away. "That looks nice," Mrs. Abernathy approved. "Much better than trousers, though you carried those off with more dignity than most ladies would have managed." "I'm grateful for whatever kept me from freezing," Zara replied with a small smile. "Mr. Keller Wade was kind enough to lend them to me when I had nothing else." Mrs. Abernathy nodded, then glanced out the window at the sun's position. "I should be heading home before dark. Will you be all right here, Miss Collins?" Zara glanced at Wade, who had risen from his chair. "I believe I will," she said. "Wade has been a perfect gentleman." "Of course he has, Mrs. Abernathy said firmly. "His mother raised him right, rest her soul." She gathered her shawl. "I'll come by tomorrow with some more suitable clothing, and don't you worry, I won't breathe a word of this to anyone in town, not with that Harrington boy looking for you." After Mrs. Abernathy had gone, a slightly awkward silence fell over the cabin. Wade cleared his throat. "I can sleep in the barn," he said. "You take the bedroom." "I can't put you out of your own bed," Zara protested. "I insist," Wade said firmly. It wouldn't be right otherwise. Recognizing the stubborn set of his jaw, Zara relented. "Thank you. You're very kind." "It's nothing," he said, looking slightly uncomfortable with her gratitude. He moved to the fireplace, adding another log to the flames. "Are you warm enough? That well water was mighty cold." "I'm much better now," Zara assured him, though she moved closer to the fire, extending her hands toward its warmth. "Though I think it will be a while before I stop feeling the chill of that water." Wade's expression darkened. What Harrington did, it wasn't just cruel, it was attempted murder. He needs to answer for it. "He will," Zara said, though she wasn't entirely convinced. The Harringtons had always seemed untouchable in Malad City. "Your father will be back in 2 days now," Zara nodded. "He should arrive on the morning stage the day after tomorrow. He's been in Boise, meeting with investors for the bank." "I'll take you to town to meet him," Wade decided. "Once he knows what happened, he can take proper steps against Harrington." "Theodore will deny it," Zara said softly. "It will be my word against his." Wade's jaw tightened. "Then we'll need to make your word stronger. Evidence, witnesses." "There weren't any witnesses," Zara reminded him. "That's why Theodore chose that spot. It's isolated and he knew my father was away." "There's me," Wade pointed out. "I found you in that well. That counts for something." "You didn't see him push me." "No, but I saw the result of it." Wade ran a hand through his dark hair, frustrated. "There has to be a way to make him pay." Zara was touched by his indignation on her behalf. Few people in Malad City would dare to stand against the Harringtons, yet this man she'd known for barely a day was ready to fight for justice for her. "Let's worry about that when my father returns," she suggested. "For now, I'm just grateful to be alive thanks to you." Wade's expression softened. "You're welcome," he said simply. They spent the evening in surprisingly comfortable conversation. Wade told her about growing up in Montana Territory, where his father had worked as a ranch foreman. After his parents died in a winter blizzard, he'd struck out on his own, determined to have land of his own rather than work for wages his whole life. His sister had married a shopkeeper in Helena and was expecting her first child. In turn, Zara shared stories of her childhood in Malad City, where her father had moved after her mother died back east. She spoke of her love of books, her small garden behind their modest house in town, and her hopes of perhaps becoming a teacher someday. "You'd make a fine teacher," Wade said with a smile. "You have a way of explaining things that makes a person want to listen." Zara felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "Thank you. Though I'm not sure the school board would hire an unmarried woman much past the age of 20, which I'll be this summer." "That seems a waste," Wade commented, stoking the fire. "A person's value shouldn't be measured by whether they're married." "That's a progressive view," Zara observed, studying him with new interest. Wade shrugged. "Just seems sensible. My mother was the smartest person I ever knew, and half her good sense came after she was married, not before." Zara laughed, delighted by his matter-of-fact wisdom. As the evening wore on, Zara found herself stifling yawns. The events of the previous day had taken their toll, and exhaustion was catching up with her. "You should rest," Wade said, noticing her tiredness. "Take the bedroom. I've put fresh linens on the bed." "Thank you," Zara said, rising from her chair. "For everything, Wade. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along when you did." "But I did," he said simply. "And now you're safe. That's what matters." Impulsively, Zara stepped forward and lightly kissed his cheek. "Good night," she said softly, before quickly retreating to the bedroom, her heart fluttering in a way that had nothing to do with her ordeal in the well. The next morning, Zara woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She dressed quickly in the calico dress and made her way to the main room where Wade was standing at the stove. "Good morning," he said with a smile. "Sleep well." Very, Zara replied, surprised to realize it was true. Despite everything, she'd slept soundly, feeling inexplicably safe under Wade's roof. "Can I help with breakfast? It's nearly done, but you could pour the coffee if you'd like." They worked together comfortably, moving around the small kitchen as if they'd done so many times before. Over breakfast, Wade outlined his plan for the day. "I need to check on some cattle at the north end of the property," he explained. "You're welcome to come along, or you can stay here if you'd prefer to rest." "I'd like to come," Zara said immediately. The last thing she wanted was to be left alone with her thoughts, which too easily drifted back to the terrifying moments in the well. "It'll be a few hours in the saddle," Wade warned. "And I've only got the one horse here at the moment. My other mount is being shod in town." "I don't mind riding double," Zara assured him, "and I'm a good rider. My father made sure of that." Wade nodded, seemingly pleased by her answer. "We'll leave after breakfast then." The day was clear and mild, perfect for riding. Rusty seemed unbothered by the extra weight as they set out across Wade's property. The land was beautiful rolling hills dotted with sagebrush, stands of cottonwood along the creek, and in the distance, mountains still capped with snow. Wade pointed out features of his ranch as they rode the spring that never ran dry, the south pasture where the grass grew thickest, the ridge where he sometimes spotted elk in the early mornings. His love for this land was evident in his voice, in the way his eyes lit up as he described his plans for expanding the herd and adding more fencing. They found the cattle grazing peacefully in a meadow near the creek. Wade dismounted to check on a young calf that had been born the previous week, and Zara watched as his strong, capable hands gently examined the animal, his voice a soothing murmur of reassurance. When he returned to her, there was a smudge of dirt on his cheek that she had to resist the urge to brush away. "Everything looks good here," he said, mounting behind her again. "Thought we might ride up to the ridge if you're not too tired. The view's worth seeing." "I'd like that," Zara replied, finding that she was enjoying this day in the open air, far from the constraints and expectations of town life. The ridge overlooked the entire valley, providing a spectacular view of the surrounding countryside. Wade helped Zara dismount, then led her to a flat rock where they could sit comfortably. He pulled a canteen and some biscuits wrapped in a cloth from his saddlebag, offering them to her. "It's not much of a picnic," he apologized. "It's perfect," Zara assured him, accepting a biscuit. "I don't think I've ever seen a view quite like this. It's why I chose this land," Wade admitted, looking out over the valley. "First time I rode up here, I knew this was where I wanted to build my life." "I can see why," Zara said softly. "There's a sense of possibility here." Wade turned to look at her, his blue eyes intense. "Exactly," he said. "Like you can breathe deeper, think clearer." For a moment they simply gazed at each other, a current of understanding passing between them. Then Wade cleared his throat and looked away. "We should head back soon," he said. "Mrs. Abernathy said she'd return this afternoon with more clothes for you." As they rode back to the cabin, Zara found herself acutely aware of Wade's presence behind her, the solid strength of his chest against her back, the careful way he held the reins to avoid crowding her, the clean scent of soap and sunshine that clung to him. It was confusing, these feelings stirring within her. 2 days ago, she'd been rejecting Theodore Harrington's proposal, certain that she wasn't ready for marriage, that she wanted more from life than being a wealthy man's ornament. Now she was finding herself drawn to a man she barely knew, a cowboy with little more than a small ranch and the strength of his own 2 hands. But there was something about Wade Keller that spoke to her in a way Theodore never had: his quiet confidence, his unwavering kindness, the respect with which he treated her. It was too soon, she knew that, and yet she couldn't deny the flutter in her heart when he smiled at her. When they returned to the cabin, they found Mrs. Abernathy waiting for them, a bundle of clothing in her arms and a worried expression on her face. "Thank goodness you're back," she said as they dismounted. "I've heard troubling news from town." Wade's expression immediately darkened. "What news?" "Theodore Harrington is gathering men to search for Miss Collins," Mrs. Abernathy said, ushering them inside. "He's telling everyone she was abducted while walking on her father's property. He's positioning himself as the concerned suitor, leading the search." Zara felt the blood drain from her face. "He's trying to cover his tracks," she whispered. "If I'm found dead, he can claim it was kidnappers." Wade's jaw tightened. "He won't find you here. No one would think to look at my place." "But what if they do?" Zara asked, a tremor in her voice. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door, Wade." "You're not trouble," he said firmly. "And I'm not afraid of Theodore Harrington or his father." Mrs. Abernathy set the bundle of clothes on the table. "I brought everything I could find that might fit you, dear, and some necessities." She glanced at Wade. "If anyone comes asking, I'll say I haven't seen either of you in days." "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy," Wade said gratefully. After the older woman left, promising to return if she heard any more news, Wade checked that his rifle was loaded and placed it near the door. "Do you think they'll really come here?" Zara asked, watching him. "Probably not," Wade admitted, "but I believe in being prepared." He hesitated, then added, "Your father returns tomorrow." Zara nodded. "The morning stage should arrive around 10 o'clock. Then we'll need to leave at dawn to reach town in time." Wade ran a hand through his hair. "I don't like the idea of taking you into Malad City with Harrington looking for you, but we need to get you to your father." "My father will know what to do," Zara said with more confidence than she felt. "He's friends with Judge Wilson. If anyone can make Theodore face justice, it's the judge." Wade nodded, though he still looked troubled. "We'll need to be careful. I'll take the back roads into town and we'll go straight to the stage depot." The rest of the afternoon passed tensely. Zara tried on the clothes Mrs. Abernathy had brought: 2 dresses, a shawl, and some necessary undergarments. Everything fit reasonably well, and she was grateful to feel properly dressed again. Wade kept busy with chores around the cabin, chopping extra wood and checking repeatedly that the doors and windows were secure. As evening fell, he prepared a simple supper of beans, bacon, and biscuits. "I'm sorry it's not fancier," he apologized as they sat down to eat. "I'm not much of a cook." "It smells wonderful," Zara assured him. "And after nearly drowning in a well, any hot meal is a luxury." Wade's expression softened. "You're remarkably brave, you know that. Most women would still be swooning after what you've been through." "Swooning wouldn't have kept me alive in that well," Zara pointed out. "And it won't help me face Theodore tomorrow." "No, but your courage will," Wade said, his blue eyes warm with admiration. "Just remember you're not facing him alone." After supper, they sat by the fire, the tension of the coming day making conversation difficult. Finally, Wade spoke. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that these past 2 days, despite the circumstances, have been—" He paused, searching for words. "Important to me." Zara looked up, meeting his gaze. "They've been important to me too," she said softly. "I'm just a rancher," Wade said, his voice low. "I don't have much to offer a woman like you, but when this is all over, when you're safe and Theodore Harrington has answered for what he did, I'd like to call on you properly if you'd allow it." Zara's heart quickened. "I'd like that very much," she whispered. For a moment she thought he might reach for her hand, might bridge the small distance between them. But then he stood, clearing his throat. "We should get some sleep," he said. "Dawn comes early and we have a long ride ahead of us." Zara nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Good night, Wade." "Good night, Zara." In the bedroom, Zara lay awake for a long time, thinking of the man sleeping in the barn, of his quiet strength and unexpected gentleness, of the way he looked at her as if she were something precious. She had known him for only 2 days, and yet she felt as if she'd known him always. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, perhaps danger. But it would also bring resolution one way or another. And after that, perhaps something new could begin. Dawn broke misty and cool over the hills. Wade was already up when Zara emerged from the bedroom, dressed in the blue dress Mrs. Abernathy had brought, her hair neatly braided and pinned. "I made coffee and biscuits," Wade said, handing her a steaming cup. "We should eat quickly. I want to be on the road while the light is still dim." They ate in practical silence, both aware of what the day might bring. When they finished, Wade handed Zara a small knife in a leather sheath. "Keep this in your pocket," he said, "just in case." Zara took it without question, understanding the gravity of his concern. Outside, Rusty was already saddled and waiting. Wade had packed the few belongings Zara had accumulated, her dried dress from the well, the clothes Mrs. Abernathy had provided. "Ready?" he asked, offering his hand to help her mount. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, settling onto the saddle. Wade mounted behind her, and they set off just as the sun was beginning to gild the eastern hills. The morning was quiet, the only sounds the steady rhythm of Rusty's hooves and the occasional call of a meadowlark. They took a circuitous route toward town, avoiding the main road in favor of less traveled paths through the hills. Wade was tense behind her, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. As they neared Malad City, the terrain became more familiar to Zara. They were approaching from the west, which would bring them directly to the stage depot without having to pass through the main part of town. "The stage should arrive in about an hour," Zara said as they finally reached the outskirts of town. "We can wait at the depot." Wade nodded, guiding Rusty toward the small building that served as Malad City's connection to the wider world. The depot was on the edge of town, a simple wooden structure with a covered platform where passengers could wait for arriving and departing stages. As they approached, Zara's heart sank. Theodore Harrington was standing on the platform, deep in conversation with Sheriff Davis. Several other men were nearby, including George Harrington, Theodore's imposing father. Wade swore under his breath. "They must have guessed you'd try to meet your father. What do we do now?" Zara whispered, fear knotting her stomach. Wade scanned the area, thinking quickly. "There's a back entrance to the depot for freight. We can go in that way and wait inside until your father arrives." They dismounted a safe distance away, tying Rusty to a hitching post behind the blacksmith shop. Moving cautiously, they made their way to the rear of the depot building. The back door was unlocked, as Wade had hoped. Inside, the small freight room was stacked with crates and mail bags. Through a doorway, they could see into the main waiting room where the ticket agent sat behind his counter, reading a newspaper. "We'll wait here," Wade whispered, positioning himself so he could keep an eye on both the waiting room and the platform outside through a small window. The stage should be here soon. Minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. Occasionally, they could hear Theodore's voice from the platform, louder and more agitated as time passed. Zara tried to steady her breathing, drawing comfort from Wade's solid presence beside her. Finally, they heard at the distant sound of the stage's arrival, the clatter of hooves and wheels, the driver's call to the team as they pulled up to the depot. "It's here," Wade murmured. "Stay behind me until we see your father." Through the window, they watched as passengers began to descend from the stage, a middle-aged couple, a young man in a business suit, and then, finally, Jonathan Collins. Zara's father looked tired from his journey, but otherwise exactly as she remembered, tall and distinguished, with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. The sight of him brought tears of relief to her eyes. Before she could move, Theodore stepped forward, approaching Jonathan with an expression of grave concern. "Mr. Collins," they heard him say, his voice carrying clearly, "I'm afraid I have disturbing news. Your daughter has been missing for 2 days. We've been searching everywhere." Jonathan's face paled. "Missing? What do you mean, missing?" "She went for a walk on your property and never returned," Theodore said, his performance convincing even to Zara, who knew the truth. "I've organized search parties, but we've found no trace of her." "Now," Wade whispered, taking Zara's hand, before he can say more. They stepped through the doorway into the waiting room, startling the ticket agent, and then out onto the platform. "Papa," Zara called, pulling away from Wade to rush toward her father. Jonathan Collins' head whipped around, his expression transforming from fear to overwhelming relief. "Zara!" he exclaimed, opening his arms to catch her as she flung herself into his embrace. "Thank God! What's happened? Where have you been?" Theodore Harrington had gone deathly pale at the sight of Zara, alive and unharmed. His father stepped forward, a hand on his son's shoulder. "This is unexpected," George Harrington said smoothly. "We were led to believe Miss Collins had met with foul play." "She nearly did," Wade said, his voice carrying across the platform as he stepped forward, "but not in the way your son has been suggesting." Sheriff Davis frowned, his hand moving to rest on his holstered pistol. "Who are you, Mr. Wade Keller?" he replied evenly. "I ranch south of town. And I found Miss Collins 2 days ago, half drowned in an abandoned well on her father's property, a well she'd been pushed into after rejecting your son's proposal of marriage." A murmur ran through the small crowd that had gathered to meet the stage. Theodore's face contorted with rage. "That's a lie," he snarled. "This man is obviously the one who abducted her." "No, Theodore," Zara said, stepping away from her father to face her would-be killer. "You pushed me into that well and left me to die. You said no one rejects a Harrington. Those were your exact words." Jonathan Collins' expression hardened as he looked from his daughter to Theodore. "Is this true? Did you try to murder my daughter?" "Of course not," George Harrington interjected. "This is absurd. My son has been leading the search for your daughter, Collins. These accusations are obviously an attempt to slander our family name." "Then how do you explain this?" Wade asked, pulling Zara's still-stained dress from his saddlebag. "This is what Miss Collins was wearing when I pulled her from that well. You can still see the waterline and the moss stains from the well walls." Sheriff Davis looked uncomfortable. "That doesn't prove anything, Keller." "Perhaps not," came a new voice, "but my testimony might." Everyone turned to see Mrs. Abernathy making her way onto the platform, a determined expression on her lined face. "Mrs. Abernathy," Sheriff Davis said, confused. "What testimony could you possibly offer?" "I've been caring for Miss Collins since Mr. Keller rescued her," the older woman said firmly. "I saw the state she was in, half drowned, terrified, her dress soaked and stained just as you see it there. And I heard Theodore Harrington in town yesterday, spreading lies about her being abducted, when he knew full well what he'd done to her." "This is preposterous," George Harrington blustered. "The word of a rancher and a widow against my sons. Sheriff, I insist you put an end to these slanderous accusations." "Actually," came yet another voice, "there's more evidence than that." All heads turned to see Judge Wilson standing at the edge of the platform, his cane tapping against the wooden boards as he approached. The white-haired jurist was the most respected legal authority in the county, and his presence immediately commanded attention. "Judge Wilson," Jonathan Collins said, clearly surprised, "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Mrs. Abernathy came to me last night," the judge explained, with a very disturbing story. I decided to investigate for myself." He turned to Theodore, whose arrogance had given way to visible anxiety. "Young man, I took the liberty of visiting the Collins property this morning, specifically the abandoned well at the northeast corner." Theodore swallowed hard. "I found several interesting items there," the judge continued. "A gentleman's handkerchief with the initials TH embroidered on it. A boot print that matches the distinctive heel on the boots you're wearing right now. And most damning of all, a witness." "A witness," Theodore repeated, his voice cracking. "That's impossible. There was no one there." A collective gasp went up from the crowd at his inadvertent admission. Theodore realized his mistake too late, clamping his mouth shut as his father closed his eyes in defeat. "The witness," Judge Wilson said with grim satisfaction, "was Samuel Tanner, who was hunting rabbits in the woods nearby. He saw you confronting Miss Collins, saw you grab her when she tried to leave, and saw you throw her into that well. He was too frightened to come forward initially, given your family's influence in this town, but when I guaranteed his protection, he told me everything." Sheriff Davis looked deeply uncomfortable now, torn between his loyalty to the Harringtons and his duty to the law. "Sheriff," the judge interrupted firmly, "you will take Theodore Harrington into custody immediately on the charge of attempted murder. And if you hesitate in this duty, I'll have the U.S. Marshal replace you before the day is out." The sheriff's shoulders sagged slightly, but he nodded and drew his pistol. "Theodore Harrington, you're under arrest," he said, unable to meet George Harrington's furious gaze. As Theodore was handcuffed, his face a mask of thwarted rage, Zara felt Wade's hand slip into hers. She turned to find him watching her, concern and something deeper in his blue eyes. "It's over," he said softly. "You're safe now." Jonathan Collins approached them, his expression a mixture of gratitude and protective concern as he noticed their clasped hands. "Mr. Keller," he said formally, "it seems I owe you my daughter's life. I don't know how I can ever repay such a debt." "There's no debt, sir," Wade replied. "I only did what any decent man would do. Nonetheless, I am eternally grateful." Jonathan turned to his daughter. "Zara, are you truly all right when I think of what might have happened?" "I'm fine, Papa," she assured him, squeezing Wade's hand. "Thanks to Wade." Jonathan noticed the gesture, his eyebrows rising slightly. "I see," he said thoughtfully. "Perhaps you both should come to the house. It seems we have much to discuss." As they left the depot, the crowd parting respectfully before them, Zara felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Theodore would face justice for what he'd done. She was safe, reunited with her father. And Wade was still beside her, his hand warm and steady around hers. Whatever came next, she would no longer be trapped in darkness. Wade Keller had pulled her into the light, and she had no intention of letting go. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and town gossip. Theodore Harrington was held for trial, his father's influence insufficient to secure his release given the seriousness of the charges, and Judge Wilson's personal interest in the case. George Harrington, his reputation severely damaged by his son's actions, retreated to his mansion on the edge of town, emerging only to consult with the expensive lawyer he had summoned from Salt Lake City. Jonathan Collins insisted that Wade stay in their guest room rather than at the hotel, partly out of gratitude and partly, Zara suspected, to observe the man who had saved his daughter and who now clearly intended to court her. "He seems a good man," Jonathan commented one evening as he and Zara sat in their small parlor after Wade had excused himself to tend to Rusty at the livery stable. "Straightforward. Honest." "He is," Zara agreed, a warmth spreading through her chest at her father's approval. "Not wealthy," Jonathan observed mildly. "No, Zara acknowledged. "But his ranch is growing and he works harder than anyone I've ever known." Jonathan smiled, reaching over to pat her hand. "I wasn't criticizing, my dear. After what Theodore proved himself to be, I think we can agree that a man's character matters far more than the size of his bank account." Zara returned his smile, grateful for his understanding. "Wade asked if he might call on me properly, once everything with Theodore is resolved." "And what did you tell him?" her father asked, though his twinkling eyes suggested he already knew the answer. "I said yes," Zara admitted, a blush coloring her cheeks. Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. "The heart knows what it wants, sometimes before the head has time to consider all the angles. But in this case, I believe both your heart and head are in agreement." He paused, then added more seriously, "You've been through a terrible ordeal, Zara. It would be understandable if your feelings for Mr. Keller were influenced by his role in your rescue." "I've thought of that," Zara said honestly, "but what I feel for Wade, it's not just gratitude. When I'm with him, I feel—" She searched for the right words. "Seen. Respected. As if he values not just my appearance or my family connections, but me, my thoughts, my hopes, my strength." "That," her father said with satisfaction, "is precisely what I hoped you would say." 2 weeks after Theodore's arrest, the preliminary hearing was held in Judge Wilson's courtroom. Zara testified calmly, recounting the horrifying experience of being thrown down the well and her rescue by Wade. Wade corroborated her story, describing how he'd found her half-drowned and terrified. Samuel Tanner, the young hunter who had witnessed the crime, gave his testimony with nervous determination, his voice growing stronger as he detailed what he had seen. The evidence was overwhelming. Judge Wilson ordered Theodore to stand trial for attempted murder, denying bail given the seriousness of the crime and the risk that the Harrington wealth might facilitate his escape from justice. As they left the courthouse, Zara felt a profound sense of relief. Theodore's handsome face had been twisted with hatred as he'd been led away, his eyes promising vengeance, but he was securely in custody and would remain so until his trial. "It's really over," she said as Wade helped her into her father's buggy. "Yes," Wade agreed, his hand lingering on hers. "He can't hurt you now." With the immediate danger past and Theodore awaiting trial, Wade reluctantly announced that he needed to return to his ranch. The spring calving season was in full swing, and he couldn't neglect his responsibilities any longer. "I understand," Zara said, walking with him to the livery where Rusty was stabled. "Your ranch needs you." Wade turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I meant what I said before, Zara. I would like to court you properly, with your father's permission, of course." "He's already given it," Zara said with a small smile. "Though he did mention something about making sure your intentions were honorable." Wade's serious expression gave way to a surprised laugh. "I'm glad to hear that, and you can assure him my intentions are entirely honorable." He hesitated, then added more softly, "Though I should warn you, those intentions do include hoping to make you my wife someday if you'll have me." Zara's heart skipped a beat. "That's very forward of you, Mr. Keller," she teased, though her voice trembled slightly. "We've only known each other for 2 weeks. Sometimes," Wade said, his blue eyes intent on hers, "you just know." He leaned forward slowly, giving her plenty of time to step away if she wished, but Zara didn't move except to lift her face to his. Their first kiss was gentle, a mere brush of lips, but it sent warmth cascading through her entire body. When they parted, Wade's smile was so tender it made her heart ache. "I'll come to town every Saturday," he promised. "And I hope you'll consider visiting the ranch sometimes, with your father as chaperone, of course." "I'd like that," Zara whispered. "Very much." Through the summer months of 1875 their courtship blossomed. Wade rode into town each Saturday, sometimes staying overnight in the Collins guest room so he could accompany them to church on Sunday. Jonathan Collins visited the ranch with Zara several times, his banker's eye noting the improvements Wade was constantly making: new fencing, an expanded barn, additional pasture land cleared of sagebrush. "He's building something substantial," Jonathan commented after one such visit. "Not just for now, but for the future," Zara nodded, understanding what her father meant. Wade was building a home that could support a family, creating a legacy that could be passed down to children not yet born. As summer gave way to fall, Theodore Harrington's trial began. It was a difficult week for Zara, reliving the horror of that day as she testified once again. But Wade was there each day, his steady presence in the courtroom giving her strength. When the jury returned their verdict guilty on all counts, she felt not triumph but a quiet sense of justice served. Theodore was sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison. As he was led from the courtroom, he glared at Zara with such venom that Wade instinctively stepped in front of her, shielding her from his hatred. George Harrington, who had aged visibly during the proceedings, left town the following day, reportedly to join his brother's business in San Francisco. With Theodore's trial concluded and justice served, Zara felt as if a chapter had closed. The well on her father's property had been permanently sealed, the memory of her ordeal gradually fading as new, happier memories took its place. On a crisp October evening, with the aspens turning gold in the hills, Wade took her for a walk along the creek that ran through his property. They had come to the ranch for the day, Jonathan giving them a few hours of privacy while he reviewed Wade's financial records, ostensibly to offer banking advice, though Zara suspected her father was assuring himself of Wade's ability to provide for a family. "Your father seems pleased with my progress," Wade said as they walked, fallen leaves crunching beneath their boots. "He mentioned that my cattle operation is growing faster than he expected." "He's impressed," Zara confirmed, "though I think he's more impressed by you than by your business acumen." Wade smiled, a hint of color touching his tanned cheeks. He stopped walking, turning to face her beside the creek where they had first picnicked months earlier. "Zara," he began, his voice uncharacteristically nervous, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, seeing your strength and your kindness, your intelligence and your grace. I find myself falling more deeply in love with you each day." Zara's breath caught as Wade reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Dropping to one knee before her, he opened it to reveal a simple but lovely ring, a small pearl set in gold. "It's not a diamond," he said apologetically. "I know that's traditional, but it's beautiful," Zara interrupted, tears welling in her eyes. Wade smiled, relieved, and took her hand in his. "Zara Collins, I love you with all my heart. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Zara whispered without hesitation. "Yes, Wade, I will marry you." The pearl gleamed as he slid the ring onto her finger, then rose to take her in his arms, his kiss conveying all the love and promise that words could not express. They were married on a bright December morning, the small church in Malad City filled with well-wishers. Mrs. Abernathy wept openly in the front pew, while Judge Wilson beamed from his seat of honor. Jonathan Collins walked his daughter down the aisle with pride, his eyes suspiciously bright as he placed her hand in Wade's. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but the look that passed between them as they spoke the ancient promises was uniquely their own, a look of deep understanding, unwavering commitment, and boundless love. The reception was held at the Collins home, where Zara changed from her wedding gown into a traveling outfit. They would be spending their wedding night at the ranch, before departing the next morning for a brief honeymoon in Salt Lake City, a luxury Wade had insisted upon, wanting to give his bride at least a small taste of the wider world before they settled into ranch life. As they prepared to leave the reception, Zara found herself standing with her father near the front door, watching as Wade said his goodbyes to the last of the guests. "Are you happy, my dear?" Jonathan asked softly. Zara turned to him, her face radiant. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible, Papa." Jonathan nodded, satisfied. "I see the way he looks at you as if you're the most precious thing in his world." "The feeling is mutual," Zara assured him, her eyes drifting back to her husband. "I never imagined I could love someone this much." "Good," Jonathan said simply. "That's as it should be." He hesitated, then added, "Your mother would have liked him, you know. She valued honesty and hard work above all else." Tears pricked Zara's eyes at the mention of the mother she still missed every day. "I think so too." Wade approached then, offering his arm to his bride. "Ready, Mrs. Keller," the name, so new and yet already so right, brought a smile to Zara's face. "Ready, Mr. Keller." They rode to the ranch in a buggy decorated with ribbons and flowers by the ladies of the church, arriving just as the winter sun was beginning to set. Wade insisted on carrying her across the threshold of the cabin, their home now, though he had plans to build a larger house in the spring. Inside, Zara was surprised to find the cabin transformed. New curtains hung at the windows, a colorful quilt adorned the bed, and a rocking chair sat near the fireplace, all wedding gifts from friends and neighbors. "Welcome home," Wade said softly, setting her gently on her feet. Zara turned in a slow circle, taking in the small but inviting space that would be the beginning of their life together. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. This modest cabin, built by Wade's own hands, represented everything she had come to value: honesty, hard work, love freely given and received. As Wade built up the fire to ward off the December chill, Zara moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his shoulder. He looked up at her touch, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "I love you," she said simply. Wade rose, taking her in his arms. "And I love you," he replied, his voice husky with emotion. "From the moment I pulled you from that well, something inside me recognized you not just as someone to save, but as someone to love, to cherish, to build a life with." "You pulled me into the light in more ways than one," Zara whispered, reaching up to trace the strong line of his jaw. "You showed me what real love looks like, not possessive or controlling, but supportive, respectful, kind." Wade leaned down to kiss her, a kiss that spoke of promise and passion and the beginning of a lifetime together. Outside, snow began to fall gently, dusting the hills around their small ranch. But inside, the warmth of their love kept the winter at bay, a light that would guide them through all the seasons of their life together. In the years that followed, Wade and Zara built a life rich with love and purpose. The small ranch grew steadily, as did their family. Their first child, a son they named James Jonathan after both their fathers, was born in the fall of 1876, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Emily. Wade built the larger house he had promised, a comfortable 2-story home with room for their growing family. Zara planted a garden that became the envy of the county, and started a small school in one room of their home, teaching not only their own children but those of neighboring ranchers who had no easy access to the town school. Jonathan Collins became a frequent visitor, delighting in his grandchildren and offering advice on the expanding business operations of the ranch. When he finally retired from banking in 1880, he moved into a small cottage Wade built for him on their property, becoming an integral part of their daily lives. The town of Malad City grew and changed as Idaho moved toward statehood, The Harrington businesses were sold to new owners, and gradually, the dark cloud that had hung over the family name faded as newer scandals, and gossip took precedence in the town's collective memory. Theodore Harrington served his full sentence, and upon release, moved east, never to return to Idaho. The well where he had left Zara to die remained sealed, eventually covered by a small flower garden that Zara tended each spring, a reminder not of darkness, but of second chances, of life emerging from what might have been death. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1885, Wade took Zara back to the ridge where he had proposed. They sat on the same flat rock, looking out over their land, now expanded to include neighboring parcels Wade had gradually acquired. The cattle herd had tripled in size, and a small apple orchard was beginning to bear fruit on the south-facing slope. "Did you ever imagine this?" Wade asked, his arm around his wife's shoulders. "That day when I pulled you from the well, did you ever think we'd build all this together?" Zara leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. At 30, she was more beautiful to him than ever, her face now graced with the faint lines that spoke of a decade of smiles and laughter. "Never," she admitted. "I was just grateful to be alive. But somehow, even then, there was something about you that felt like home." She tilted her face up to his. "Like I'd been searching for you without knowing it." Wade's kiss was as tender as it had been on their wedding day, though now deepened by years of shared joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges weathered together. "Best decision I ever made," he murmured against her lips, "taking that shortcut across your father's land that day." "Best decision I ever made," Zara replied with a smile, "saying yes when you asked to court me." As the sun began to set over their land, their home, their legacy, Wade and Zara Keller walked hand in hand back toward the house where their children waited. The path from darkness to light had not always been easy, but they had walked it together, step by step, day by day, building a love that had pulled them both into the brightness of a life well lived. And in the stories they told their children and grandchildren in the years that followed, they never forgot to emphasize the most important lesson of their unlikely beginning: that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures, and that true love is not about possession but about liberation, about pulling each other into the light, again and again, day after day, for all the days of their lives.